Welcome to another episode of Serial Killer Files by Skoob. I'm your host, Arthur Morgan, and today we're diving deep into one of Ohio's most horrifying serial killer cases, the story of Anthony Sowell, better known as the Cleveland Strangler. Picture this. It's late October, 2009, in Cleveland, Ohio. The autumn air carries more than just the scent of fallen leaves. In the Mount Pleasant neighborhood on Imperial Avenue, residents have been complaining about a putrid smell for months. They assumed it was coming from a nearby sausage factory. They were wrong. Dead wrong. What they didn't know was that their neighbor, Anthony Sowell, had been systematically murdering women for over 2 years, turning his modest 2-story home into a charnel house that would shock even seasoned investigators. When police finally entered Sowell's residence, what they found defied belief. The first discovery came in a third-floor sitting room where SWAT officers found 2 decomposing bodies. Towels had been strategically placed against the bottom of the door, a crude but effective method to mask the overwhelming stench of rotting flesh. But this was just the beginning. As FBI agents and coroner's investigators combed through every inch of the property, the true scope of Sowell's killing spree began to emerge. Cadaver dogs led investigators to a visible crawl space where 2 more bodies lay hidden, ligatures still wrapped around their necks like grotesque jewelry. The basement held its own secrets. Under the stairs, beneath a carefully constructed layer of dirt, investigators found another partially decomposed body. This victim was wrapped in duct tape with methodical precision, wrists bound with string. Former Cuyahoga County Coroner Dr. Frank Miller would later describe the variety of burial techniques as unprecedented in his career. "We were encountering a variety of burial techniques," Miller recalled. Bodies were wrapped in blankets and trash bags and left out in the open, while others were put in bags and covered with soil. In the basement, significant effort had been made to wrap the body in duct tape. The investigation took on an almost archaeological quality as forensic experts used thermal imaging equipment and X-ray scanners to examine the walls, searching for additional victims. In the basement, perhaps most disturbing of all, they discovered a skull wrapped in black plastic, sitting in a bucket that bore the teeth marks of rodents who had made it their feeding ground. Sowell's boots, found in that third-floor room, were crawling with maggots and blowflies, evidence of the flesh-eating insect infestation that had consumed the sitting room where he spent his quiet evenings. When the cadaver dogs finished with the house, they turned their attention to Sowell's backyard. The animals immediately showed interest in an area near the back stairs, where the soil appeared recently disturbed. What lay beneath would cement Sowell's place in the annals of American serial killing. 5 more bodies were buried in shallow graves throughout the property. Dr. Miller supervised their careful removal, treating each gravesite like a crime scene within a crime scene. One victim was wrapped in transparent plastic, with a phone charger cord around her neck and her wrists bound with cloth strips. The victims were usually bound with wire or rope and wrapped in plastic bags, a signature that spoke to Sowell's methodical approach to murder and disposal. This wasn't the work of someone who killed in a fit of rage. This was systematic, calculated, and disturbingly organized. Now let me tell you about the women whose lives Sowell cut short. These weren't just statistics or case numbers. They were daughters, mothers, sisters, and friends whose disappearances were often overlooked by a system that failed them. Crystal Dozier, age 38, holds the tragic distinction of being Sowell's first victim. She vanished in May 2007 and was later found buried in his backyard. For over 2 years, her family searched for answers while her body lay just feet from where neighbors walked their dogs and children played. Tashana Culver was a 31-year-old nursing assistant and beautician who disappeared in June 2008. She was found stuffed in a trash bag on the 3rd floor of Sowell's home, discarded like garbage despite being someone's beloved daughter. The youngest victim, LaShonda Long, was only 25 when she died. Her case remains particularly haunting. Only her skull was recovered, found in that rodent-chewed bucket in Sowell's basement. Her body has never been found, denying her family even the small comfort of a complete burial. Michelle Mason, 45 and a mother of two, went missing in October 2008. She was HIV positive and suffered from bipolar disorder, vulnerabilities that may have made her an easier target for Sowell's predatory behavior. Perhaps most infuriating is the case of Tonya Carmichael, aged 52, who disappeared in November 2008. When her family approached police to file a missing person report, they were turned away. Think about that for a moment. A woman vanishes, her family begs for help, and the system that's supposed to protect us simply shrugs its shoulders. Kim Yvette Smith, 44, was an artist and accomplished singer who was last seen in January 2009. Nancy Cobbs, 43, was a construction worker and grandmother of 5 who disappeared in April 2009. In the same month, Imelda Amy Hunter, a 47-year-old beautician and mother of 3, also vanished into Sowell's web of death. Janice Webb, aged 48, disappeared in June 2009. Her body was found under that pile of dirt in Sowell's basement. Talacia Fortson, 31, also vanished in June 2009 and was discovered in the third-floor sitting room, the same room where Sowell would relax after committing murder. Diane Turner, a 38-year-old mother of 5, was last seen in September 2009. Her remains were found alongside Fortson's on the third floor. 5 children lost their mother, and the world lost someone who mattered. Here's where this story becomes even more infuriating. Anthony Sowell didn't suddenly become a killer in 2007. He was a registered sex offender who had recently been released from prison. Yet when a woman named Gladys tried to warn authorities about him, the system failed again. On a cold day, officers Kevin Walker and Angel Sarah from the Cleveland Police Department responded to Gladys waving frantically for help. She reported that Sowell had attacked her, attempted to undress her, and had punched and choked her. Officer Walker documented injuries on her hand and neck, and Gladys expressed genuine fear that Sowell would find and kill her. She was rushed to University Hospital's emergency room, where she received 12 stitches on her thumb. Her injuries were photographed, samples were taken from beneath her fingernails, and her torn clothes were collected as evidence. This was textbook police work, thorough, professional, and by the book. Gladys even provided crucial information about Sowell's house, telling officers that traces of her blood might be found on the stairs and walls. When officers went to investigate, they couldn't enter without a search warrant, but they noted what appeared to be bloodstains and signs of struggle in the snow around the entrance. The next day, sex crimes detective Georgia Hussein met with Gladys, who provided detailed descriptions of Sowell's appearance during the attack and told them where her remaining clothes could be found in the house. A search warrant was obtained. Officers Walker and Sarah found exactly what Gladys said they would find: her clothes and a bucket containing shards of glass. Sowell was arrested on suspicion of attempted rape and attempted murder. Justice seemed within reach. But then, in a decision that would haunt investigators later, Sowell was released after just 2 days. The reason? Lack of evidence and doubts about Gladys's credibility. Let that sink in. They had physical evidence, witness testimony, documented injuries, blood evidence, and a suspect who was a registered sex offender fresh out of prison. Yet somehow, this wasn't enough. Gladys was devastated by Sowell's release. She felt that she hadn't been taken seriously because of her past struggles with drug addiction. The police had overlooked the crucial fact that Sowell was a registered sex offender who had recently been released from prison. Her credibility was questioned because of past drug-related offenses and an ongoing assault case. But who was Gladys really? Yes, she had struggled with severe drug addiction that she funded through panhandling and shoplifting. But addiction doesn't erase a person's worth or their right to justice and protection. Gladys had a promising start in life. Born in Cleveland, she was talented in music and sports and performed well academically. Her parents divorced when she was 9, but her father remained involved in her life. Her musical talent was nurtured by her uncle, who was a Motown Records musician. She earned a music scholarship to Central State University, where she achieved academic success and seemed destined for a bright future. However, she left just short of completing her bachelor's degree in music education due to a difficult breakup with her college boyfriend. Sometimes life takes unexpected turns, and addiction can trap anyone. The point is this: Gladys deserved to be believed. Her past didn't make her assault less real or less serious. And if the system had taken her seriously, 11 women might still be alive today. Fast forward to October 2009. The bodies have been discovered, and Anthony Sowell has become a fugitive. But he wasn't alone in those crucial hours after the discovery. A neighbor named Madison found herself in an extraordinary situation that would help authorities track down one of Ohio's most wanted men. When Madison learned about the corpses found at Sowell's residence, she noticed his heightened agitation and sensed his desperation to escape. In a moment of civic courage that probably saved lives, she decided to take action. She offered to drive him back to his home and suggested he should cooperate with authorities. "I feel that you need to tell the police what is going on," she told him firmly. Despite his obvious hesitation and growing panic, Sowell complied and began approaching her vehicle. Madison was uncertain about Sowell's direct involvement with the corpses at that point, but something about being alone with him made her deeply uneasy. She suggested that his nephew accompany them for safety, but Sowell asked the young man to stay behind. As he entered Madison's car, he said something that would chill her to the bone. "It's all going to come out now." When she asked what he meant, his response was cryptic and disturbing. "That girl made me do it." That car ride must have felt like an eternity. Madison recalls the tension-filled drive, desperately wanting to reach the corner of East 123rd and Imperial to drop him off and get away from this increasingly dangerous situation. But when they arrived and saw the police barricades surrounding his house, Sowell's demeanor changed completely. He requested to be driven back to his sister's residence instead. Madison complied, making sure he actually entered the house before she left. Then she drove back toward Imperial Avenue, her mind finally processing the terrifying reality that she had been alone in a confined space with a potential mass murderer. "My knees were shaking so bad that I could barely drive," Madison later recalled. "I just screamed all the way back home. I just couldn't believe that this had just happened." The weight of what could have happened to her must have been overwhelming. But Madison didn't just go home and try to forget about it. She understood the gravity of what Sowell might have confessed to in her car. She told her son and several neighbors about her experience, explaining that Sowell may have just confessed to multiple murders. Despite one neighbor's warning against involving the police, Madison's son and a friend immediately relayed Sowell's location to a uniformed officer. Within hours, Madison found herself in a police car with her son and his friend, heading back to Sowell's sister's house with Cleveland homicide detective Melvin Smith following close behind. When they arrived, Detective Smith spoke with Sowell's sister Tressa and his nephew Giovanni, who delivered devastating news. Sowell had left the house on foot approximately 10 minutes earlier. Armed with a description of Sowell's clothing, the officer escorted Madison and the others back home while a massive manhunt began. The U.S. Marshals Service coordinated with various regional law enforcement agencies to create a dragnet across Cleveland. Crime scene investigators continued their methodical examination of Sowell's house of horrors, while hundreds of officers searched for the man responsible. That night, Madison couldn't sleep. The reality of her situation was almost too much to process. After the police took my report and dropped me off, I was so frightened that I told my daughter to turn on every light in the house, she remembered. It was surreal to know that a killer had been living across the street from me. It was like something out of a horror movie. Leading the manhunt was Sergeant Ronald Ross, a 20-year veteran of the Cleveland Police Department's 4th District. Ross was no stranger to high-pressure situations. He had been instrumental in forming the CPD's Gang Impact Squad in late 2007, and in its first 6 months, his undercover unit had confiscated dozens of guns and arrested more than 300 people for violent crimes. But this assignment came with an unusual deadline. Deputy Chief Ed Tomba had called Ross with specific instructions. They wanted Sowell in custody before trick-or-treaters began making their rounds on Halloween night. We live in a society of TV and movies, and they didn't want anyone turning the night into a Michael Myers thing, Ross explained, referencing the fictional villain from the Halloween horror movies. It would have been mad chaos. The image of children walking the streets while a serial killer remained at large was unthinkable. Ross assembled a team including detectives Robert McKay, Fareed Aleem, and Luther Roddy. They equipped themselves with shotguns and bulletproof vests and set out in unmarked vehicles, 2 in an undercover van and 2 in a sedan. They knew Sowell would be watching for police cars, so stealth was essential. We hit the streets and started knocking on doors, Ross recalled. There was no other way we could have handled it. All the modern technology that we have now is great, but ultimately we have to go right back to old-fashioned police work. So we beat the bushes. They searched approximately 100 houses that night, checking homes of Sowell's relatives, known associates, and even an old childhood residence. Other officers suggested monitoring bus and train stations since Sowell didn't own a car, but Ross had a different theory. Sowell was a guy of the neighborhood, and I figured he was going to stay here because he was comfortable here, Ross explained. I told my guys that we were going to catch him walking down the street, and it was going to be a non-dramatic capture. Cleveland police received hundreds of tips about Sowell's whereabouts that night. It seemed that every time someone saw a curtain move in a house, they called us, Ross said. As someone who collected scrap metal for money, Sowell knew all the abandoned houses in the neighborhood. They broke padlocks off doors and searched every possible hiding place. By 3 a.m., exhaustion was setting in. Ross made the difficult decision to pause the search. We needed to be sharp, he said. There were risks involved in searching every nook and cranny of empty houses. We knew that Sowell was in a position where he had nothing to lose. While the manhunt continued, forensic experts were still uncovering the full scope of Sowell's crimes. The methodical examination of his property revealed a killer who had developed increasingly sophisticated methods of concealment and disposal. The variety of techniques was particularly striking to investigators. Some bodies were simply wrapped in blankets and trash bags, suggesting rushed or panicked disposal. Others showed evidence of careful planning. The body found under the basement stairs had been wrapped in duct tape with almost ritualistic precision. Perhaps most chilling was the effort required to carry soil upstairs to bury a body in the crawl space. This wasn't just about hiding evidence. It suggested a level of comfort with the decomposition process that spoke to either complete desensitization or active enjoyment of his victim's decay. The FBI-trained cadaver dog's behavior provided crucial insights into Sowell's methods. When the dog showed interest in a repaired section of wall near where the first bodies were discovered, investigators knew they were dealing with someone who had thought carefully about concealment. The wall had been deliberately cut and mended to hide the crawl space. Dr. Frank Miller, the coroner who supervised the recovery operation, noted how unusual it was for someone to store decaying bodies in their living space. Typically, this behavior is only seen when someone is trying to continue collecting a deceased person's Social Security benefits, or when a disabled person doesn't know how to report a parent's death. But Sowell was different. He was living with the smell, the insects, and the constant reminder of his crimes. He had created a macabre museum of murder in his own home, and somehow managed to function normally enough that neighbors didn't suspect the truth for over 2 years. This suggests a level of psychological detachment that's rare even among serial killers. Most murderers try to distance themselves from their crimes, but Sowell surrounded himself with the evidence. He was sleeping, eating, and relaxing just feet away from decomposing corpses. The fact that he placed towels under doors shows he was aware of the smell and took basic steps to contain it. But he never attempted to properly dispose of the bodies. This contradictory behavior, awareness combined with acceptance, provides a window into a profoundly disturbed mind. Anthony Sowell's eventual capture and trial would become the most expensive publicly funded criminal defense in Cuyahoga County history, costing taxpayers almost $700,000. His defense attorney, Rufus Sims, faced the impossible task defending a client whose guilt seemed obvious to everyone. Sowell was ultimately found guilty of murdering 11 women and attempting to murder 3 others. He now resides on Ohio's death row, awaiting execution by lethal injection. But for the families of his victims, no amount of justice can restore what was taken from them. The case exposed significant problems in how missing persons reports are handled, particularly when the victims come from marginalized communities. The fact that Tonya Carmichael's family was refused when they tried to file a missing person report represents a systemic failure that likely contributed to additional deaths. The story of Gladys and her ignored warning remains one of the most troubling aspects of this case. Here was a clear opportunity to stop Sowell before he killed again. But institutional bias and prejudice against drug users allowed him to continue his killing spree. This case should have been a wake-up call about how we treat victims based on their social status, addiction struggles, or criminal history. Every person deserves protection under the law, regardless of their past or present circumstances. The women Sowell targeted weren't random victims. They were specifically chosen because they came from communities that he knew wouldn't be taken seriously by law enforcement. This calculated targeting of vulnerable populations is a common pattern among serial killers, and it's enabled by societal indifference to certain groups of people. Today, Anthony Sowell's House of Horrors has been demolished, but the scars on the Mount Pleasant community remain. Neighbors who lived across the street from a mass murder scene struggle with survivors' guilt and trauma. Children who played in the area where bodies were buried have had to process unimaginable horror. Madison's courage in helping authorities track Sowell's movements likely prevented additional crimes. Her willingness to get involved, despite obvious personal risk, demonstrates the kind of civic engagement that can make the difference between capturing a killer and allowing them to claim more victims. The case also highlights the importance of believing victims and taking all reports seriously, regardless of the reporter's background. If Gladys had been believed and Sowell had been properly investigated after her assault, 11 families would still have their loved ones. As we conclude this deep dive into one of Ohio's most horrific crimes, it's important to remember that this story isn't really about Anthony Sowell. It's about Crystal Dozier, Tishana Culver, LaShonda Long, Michelle Mason, Tonya Carmichael, Kim Yvette Smith, Nancy Cobbs, Imelda Hunter, Janice Webb, Talacia Fortson, and Diane Turner. These women had dreams, relationships, talents, and people who loved them. They were someone's daughter, mother, sister, or friend. Their lives had value that extended far beyond the circumstances that made them vulnerable to a predator like Sowell. Crystal was 38 and had lived through decades of experiences that shaped who she was. Tishana was using her skills as a nursing assistant to help others, and had developed her talents as a beautician. LaShonda was only 25. Think of all the life experiences she was denied, all the people she might have touched with her presence. The Cleveland Strangler case is a chilling reminder of how easily society's most vulnerable can be overlooked and how predators thrive when indifference takes root. It exposes systemic failures, deep-seated prejudices, and the dangerous gaps that allow evil to hide in plain sight. Yet this case also highlights extraordinary courage. Madison's decision to help police, despite real personal danger, proves that one brave choice can stop unimaginable harm. And the tireless overnight search led by Sergeant Ross and his team reminds us that every hour matters when lives are on the line. Anthony Sowell now sits on death row, but this story isn't over. Because the real question remains: how many warnings were missed, and how many voices went unheard before it was too late? If you want to explore the deeper layers, unanswered questions, and haunting details we couldn't fully cover here, download the Skoob app now to get access to the complete story. The full investigation is waiting for you. Until next time, stay aware. And remember, listening can save lives.